This afternoon, a friend of mine, Sandeep Jaiswal, is talking to us. He started collecting Indian states at the age of 20 when he moved from Calcutta to California to attend college. Liz Blake, an ardent collector of Indian states living in San Francisco, introduced him to the mesmerizing field of Indian princely states. And within 6 months, Sandeep had acquired, thanks to an uncle who financed the purchase, a 26-volume collection. He's never looked back. And while he's added other collecting areas such as postal stationery of British India, which is fantastic, by the way, Aden, Burma, Ceylon, and Nepal, he's just as passionate about the Indian princely states today as he was 40 years ago. Jammu and Kashmir philately is arguably one of the most interesting and challenging areas among the Indian princely states. Sandeep was very lucky to have Dr. Fritz Stahl, the author of The Stamps of Jammu and Kashmir, the book which is considered the best that's ever been published on the subject, as his mentor and guru, who taught him most of what he knows about this area. Dr. Stahl spent months of demystifying this complex and challenging area. It became a weekly routine for Sandeep to spend hours at a time in his residence in Berkeley, California. In 14 years of collecting this area and having been extremely fortunate in acquiring some of the finest collections to ever been formed on the subject, Sandeep finally put together two single-frame exhibits last year, both having been awarded gold medals. He's now preparing a multi-frame exhibit at the FIP show in Dubai, which I am really looking forward to see when I go there. He's written numerous articles, exhibited at the national and international level, having won over 50 gold medals for his various exhibits. He's the past editor of the India Post, the Journal of the India Study Circle, and he expertises Indian states philatelic items for 3 organisations. But most importantly, he's a really great guy, and I've had the honour of meeting his wonderful family. So here you go, Sandeep, over to you.
Simon, thank you very much for the kind words. Thank you for the friendship. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Today, so when we first started off talking about my presentation on Jammu Kashmir, the idea was to give a general presentation covering all aspects of Jammu Kashmir philately from the beginning till the end. Unfortunately, as I got into it, I realized that I wouldn't be able to do much justice in 45 minutes covering the entire subject. So fortunately, I was allowed to break it up. This is going to be just part 1. It's going to start with Dag Zaruri and it'll end with the first circular stamps of Jammu Kashmir. So during the British Raj in India, there were hundreds of Indian princely states that had various degrees of power. Some of them were relatively minuscule. Some of them were very large, like Hyderabad, Jammu Kashmir. Of these hundreds of states, 40 Indian princely states issued their own postage stamps. Listed them on the bottom. Of these 40 states, sadly, only 38 of them are currently listed in Stanley Gibbons' catalog. For some strange reason, which I just can't understand why, Kota and Tonk, which both issued stamps in the 19th century, are yet to be listed in Stanley Gibbons. Scott catalog, on the other hand, lists both Kota and Tonk, but ironically, they don't list Shahpura. So there are two different, the Indian states that issued their own stamps, they can be divided in 2 categories. One is called convention states, where they had an agreement with the imperial government as far as rates, stamps. So in essence, they use British India stamps overprinted with the name of the respective state. There were 6 such states, Chamba, Faridkot, Gwalior, Nabha, and Patiala. The rest of the states are termed in Stanley Gibbons as feudatory states. I prefer to call them Indian princely states. And Jammu Kashmir was one such Indian princely state that issued its own stamps, had nothing to do with the imperial government. And here we have a map of 1947 map, right shortly before the partition. And you can see Jammu Kashmir is on the top. And to the left of Jammu Kashmir would be present-day Pakistan. So give you a little background on Jammu Kashmir. It was considered one of the crown jewels of the Indian princely states. So the state post was actually established much earlier in 1846, and was done just like many of the other Indian princely states. The state post was established primarily to handle official mail, the transmission of official mail or official correspondence. But it wasn't too long before it was opened up to the general public. And before it was opened up to the general public, it was the state post allowed the carriage of mail for privileged people in the early days. And then at some point later on, it was opened up to the general public. The importance of Jammu Kashmir stamps. Jammu Kashmir stamps were considered one of the great rarities, and anybody who was considered somebody, in order to be considered somebody in philately, had to have back in the 19th century, had to have a good showing of Jammu Kashmir. Otherwise, you weren't considered an important collector of an important philatelist. Rarity. Just a little bit on rarity of Jammu Kashmir stamps. There's 184 different stamps listed in Stanley Gibbons' catalog today. Of these 184 stamps, 39 of these stamps, 10 or fewer copies exist today. So that can put in perspective how rare the stamps of Jammu and Kashmir truly are. And if you start taking into account errors and varieties like print in the wrong color, wrong denomination, and things like that, or bisects, then the rarity goes skyrockets. Let's talk about the complexity of Jammu Kashmir stamps. For the longest time, I'm actually going, I won't read it out. It's right here. I'm quoting David Messon. He was a great collector of Jammu Kashmir. And basically, he went on to write, and this is in his first of two books that he published on Jammu Kashmir, and this book was published in 1900. He basically wrote that there were just the circular stamps in the 1899 catalog. There were some what do you write? Several varieties. 16 varieties of these stamps. So, but the reason it became very complex, and I'll go on to explain later on towards the end of the presentation, is stamps that one considered some of the greatest rarities of Jammu Kashmir, called the Die 1 or Die A by Scott, eventually were proven to be forgeries, but those were considered some of the greatest rarities of Jammu Kashmir in the 19th century. So and the fact that there were plenty of reprints, and we'll get into that story as well later on, and forgeries, makes the area of Jammu Kashmir quite complex, but that much more interesting. Postal rates. I believe, although I disagree with the current published postal rates, I believe, based on my research, that the state postal rates mirrored those of British India. To my mentor, Dr. Fitzstall, he was my guru when it came to Jammu Kashmir. He spent hundreds and hundreds of hours teaching me everything one could know about Jammu Kashmir. he was an amazing man. He was a scholar on Indian Vedic rituals. I've got a barcode on the bottom if somebody's interested to learn. He was just an extraordinary man. You may want to scan that barcode. It just gives you a background about his other passion, which was Hindu mythology. Moving on to the very first stamp of Jammu Kashmir. This is the Dag Zaruri. Dag Zaruri means, literally translates to the word express mail. This is one of two copies known. This is ex Hellriegel, and it's makes it one of the world's great rarities, with one of only two examples known. Next comes, so if you remember, I'd mentioned that the state allowed the transmission of private correspondence. It was basically early on when it first started, the concept was fairly simple. Most Indian merchants would rather send mail postage due so that the recipient would have to pay for the postage. And the reason they did that practice was very common is because that pretty much ensured that the mail would get delivered, because otherwise the state post would have done all the work for nothing. So that's how the transmission of mail worked. Most of them were sent bearing, meaning postage was to be paid by the addressee. However, when francs were introduced, that changed, and I have to disagree with my mentor, Dr. Stahl, who actually believed that these francs were simply seals to indicate that this was carried by official mail. I am fully convinced now, and I'll explain to you why in just a couple of slides, why these francs were only impressed upon letters only after postage had been collected in cash. Dr. Stahl says less than 20 covers are known, and I have to agree with his comment, his statement. Less than 20 covers are known today bearing Jammu Kashmir francs. Of the census that I maintain, 15 of them are known with the Jammu franc, and only 3 are known with the Srinagar franc. The text is different. Jammu franc reads by grace of Sri Raghunath, which is a god, and in post office 1859. It's very possible that these were used as early as 1859. However, the earliest known letter with a franc is 1861, and this happens to be the earliest known cover with Jammu and Kashmir franc. And here we have one that is used in combination with Imperial India. This is, of course, the reason it has a British India stamp is because the rules were such that the state postage only paid for transmission of mail within the state boundaries. Any mail addressed to a destination outside the boundaries of Jammu Kashmir required Imperial British India stamps. So this cover is, of course, addressed to Amritsar, which is Punjab, and hence it has a half-anna postage. And the Jammu seal indicates that the half-anna postage, state postage, was prepaid in cash. Then we have one, again, but interestingly enough, all the combination covers with francs that I know of, every single one of them is addressed to Amritsar only. That's the only destination. This too is addressed to Amritsar, but the sender did not prepay the imperial postage of half anna. So, of course, there's a small box, if you notice, right on top of, impressed on top of the seal. It says 1 AS, indicating that 1 anna postage due. And the way postage due was calculated was basically, it was charged at twice the deficiency. So since half anna was unpaid, the postage due was 1 anna's, which the recipient would have had to pay. You also see a box too late strike, which basically indicates that Sialkot was the Imperial Exchange Post Office. So the way the mail moved is it was sent from Jammu to Sialkot, which is where the Imperial Exchange Post Office was, and then Sialkot would process the mail and pass it on to Amritsar. The reason we have a too late strike is because this article of mail was received too late in the day for the Sialkot post office to process its transmission the same day. So it was held overnight and processed the next day. Here we have an interesting cover. It's the only one that I know of, which is a combination cover as well. But this obviously must have been a double weight letter, and hence it has an Imperial 1 Anna postage. My guess is that the prepayment for this franc would have been 1 Kashmiri Anna. Interestingly enough, the Kashmiri currency, which was also in Annas and Pies and Rupees, at that time was valued at half the imperial currency. And here now we move on to the Kashmir franc. This is one of only 3 known examples of the Kashmir franc. It's slightly, the text is obviously different, and it was impressed in a different ink color. Moving on to the circular stamps. So here we have the design of the stamp. It's got 2 different languages, scripts in which the text is all carved out of metal die, and the year is clearly written in Urdu. It says 1866, and that's when these stamps were first issued. No one knows the exact date of issue. There's no record as such. There's no archive or government records to indicate when the stamps were issued. But so basically, the date keeps changing. We keep changing over time. It has changed. It's now March 6th, I believe, or March 5th is the earliest known. March 23rd, sorry. March 23rd is the earliest known dated cover bearing a circular stamp. And that's how we've come to establish that March 23rd is the issue date. It really is not the issue date, it's the earliest known cover. So let's talk about the denomination. It's a very interesting story about the denomination of the 3 stamps. There were only 3 dies, a half anna, a 1 anna, and a 4 anna. Now, these stamps were properly identified by Pemberton in 1868. But for some bizarre reason, he changed the denomination. He transposed the denominations of the 1 anna with the 4 anna and the 4 anna with the 1 anna. Now, my guess is that because if you look at the stamp on the very right, the 4 annas, it's got a vertical stroke in the center. That could have been mistaken by some as 1. And maybe that is why it was changed to 1 anna. So for the longest time, from 1872 onwards, all catalogs, all collectors, and all literature showed the 4 annas as the 1 anna stamp and the 1 anna as the 4 anna stamp. It wasn't until the 1940s that Garrett Adams and Haverback basically proved that the denominations had to be switched back. And it wasn't until 1894. Now, mind you, that's 110 years later after the stamps were first issued that the catalogs made the correction. So these stamps were issued on the circular stamps of Jammu Kashmir were issued on 3 different papers. The first one being what they call native paper. It has, at first glance, it looks very much like laid paper. It does have vertical lines, but these lines are not evenly spaced and they're not perfectly straight. And some of the other characteristics of the native paper is the fact that it has rough texture and is of uneven thickness. The earliest stamps, the circular stamps, were first printed in watercolor ink. Gray black was the very first. Well, I shouldn't say it was the very first, but the catalogs list gray black as the very first stamp of Jammu Kashmir. This in gray black was issued in all three denominations. As we'll find out, some of the stamps were only issued in certain denominations, not necessarily in all three colors. All three denominations I meant. So here we have the half anna. This is listed as the first stamp of Jammu Kashmir, SG1, Scott number 1. It's a scarce stamp in unused condition, and it's fairly common and used. However, the 1 anna is an extremely rare stamp, and of which only 6 unused copies have been recorded to date. And ironically, all 6 copies are cut to shape. Now, the reason you find a lot of these Jammu Kashmir stamps cut to shape is because mail was charged based on weight. And the single rate was for letters weighing under quarter tola. Now, 1 tola is only 3/8 of an ounce. So a quarter of 3/8 of an ounce was the weight restriction for letters to travel at a single weight, letter weight. So, of course, stamps, they would cut the corners off, just cut it to shape so that it would save on the weight. The 4 annas in gray black happens to be one of only 3 known examples. Here we have what is believed to be the earliest known dated usage of the 1 anna in gray black. Moving on to royal blue. This was also issued in March of 1866. Oh, I made the mistake of putting 1876. It was only issued for a short period of less than a month between March 1866 to April 1866. I apologize for the typo. So the half anna is a discovery copy. It's ex Frederick Earl. It's the only known example of the half anna in royal blue. The 1 anna happens to be one of 2 known copies, and the 4 anna happens to be one of 2 known copies as well. And here we have a beautiful pair of the 1 anna royal blue. And here we have a 1 anna royal blue used on cover. This happens to be the earliest known usage of a 1 anna stamp from Jammu Kashmir. And here we have a combination cover. This is, of course, this letter is addressed to Amritsar. It's ex-Yardley, and it's got the imperial half anna stamp because that basically would have paid postage from Sialkot to Amritsar. Unfortunately, the letter weighed more than a quarter of 3/8 ounce, more than a quarter tola, and hence the box strike insufficient, indicating that the letter was insufficiently paid. There was insufficient postage. It should have been prepaid with 1 anna stamp, but because it was only paid with half anna stamp, there was a postage due calculated twice the deficiency, which works out to 1 anna. As if you notice to the right of the box insufficient, there's the manuscript 1AS indicating 1 anna postage due. Moving on to ultramarine. Now, I should make one clarification. Although there's 4 different distinct shades of blue stamps, circular stamps of Jammu Kashmir, I believe these were simply results of mixing colors. These stamps are printed on demand as and when needed. So say the first batch was mixed and it ended up being royal blue. The next time the printers mixed a batch of blue ink, which they intended to be the same as the previous batch, but it ended up being closer to ultramarine shade. This shade is known to have been used for a longer period of time, was known from March 1866 to March 1867. So ultramarine is much, much more common than the royal blue shade. However, the half anna ultramarine is an extremely rare stamp. It happens to be one of only 4 known unused examples. And here we have one of only two known half-anna ultramarine stamps used on cover. So if you remember, I mentioned that the denominations were transposed, and for the longest time, the 1 anna was thought to be 4 annas and vice versa. So this is a spectacular piece. It's got a pair of the 4 annas on the left. On the left is a genuine pair of the 1 anna, which at that time was believed to have been 4 annas. But on the bottom right, it's actually had a pair of 4 annas. What somebody's done is, obviously the 4 annas was much rarer than the 1 anna at that time, in those days. So what somebody's done is drawn an arc underneath the denomination on the bottom horizontal pair in Chinese ink to make it look like what was back then considered 4 anna denomination. So in essence, the sad part is the person actually, in today's date, actually devalued this item, because by drawing the arc, it was a great rarity, a pair of 4 annas, which sadly he converted it to 1 anna. The other shade of blue is indigo. That's of course also another great rarity. It's only known used for a short period of a month between December 1867 to January 1868. This happens to be one of 4 known unused examples. And it's only known in the 4 anna denomination. And here we have a beautiful combination cover. When I say combination, I mean the Jammu rectangular and the Jammu circular, because this stamp was, all catalogs list the stamp as being available only in the province of Jammu, not in Kashmir. However, we have 2 examples of 4 anna indigos, both with clearly cancelled by what is called Srinagar brick red seal. So each district used their own cancel. Jammu used magenta cancel, and Srinagar used brick red. Both these copies being cancelled by brick red is clear indication. Now it's entirely possible that the letter was sent from Jammu and the stamps are made uncancelled and they were cancelled upon receipt in Srinagar, but I doubt, if it was one stray example, I'd say, okay, that's a possibility, but to find 2 copies of an extremely rare stamp, both with Srinagar cancelled, makes me believe that these stamps were available at both Srinagar and Jammu. The next color is red. Red was one of the most common colors. It was used for the longest period of time, from January 1869 all the way to August 1877, when they stopped producing circular stamps. Here we have a pair of the 1 anna stamp on cover. This is the only known used multiple of the 1 anna red. And here we have a combination of the 4 anna red with a half anna Jammu rectangular stamp. This happens to be the earliest known cover bearing a red circular stamp. The next shade we have is what is termed as orange red. Again, I believe that the state intended to produce red stamps, but inevitably, based on the time they mix the ink, end up being orange red. And then there's 2 other shades of variations of red. So orange red is a scarce color, much scarcer than the red being the most common shade of them. And they were printed in all 3 denominations. Here we have a combination cover. It's a registered cover. So the 4 anna, so the registration rate, and again, going back to my point that the state rates mirrored those of the imperial rate, and this is a perfect example. This cover is franked with 4.5 annas of imperial postage and 4.5 annas of state postage. It's got a 4 anna orange red circular stamp with I take it back. This is a 1 anna. This is a 1 anna Jammu rectangular, so I'm going to have to relook into this. It's possible, it's actually quite possible that this cover is overpaid by half an hour state postage, because it adds up to 5 annas in state postage and 4.5 annas in imperial postage. And it doesn't look like any stamps, any imperial stamps are missing from this cover. So, but nevertheless, it's a fabulous, beautiful combination cover of both Jammu rectangular and Jammu circular and imperial stamps. The next shade is orange. The orange shade is not yet known in the half anna denomination. It's quite possible that it was printed, but then remember, these stamps were printed on demand, so perhaps when this particular ink shade was mixed, there was no need for half anna, so it's very possible it was never printed in half annas. Here we have the only known cover bearing a 4 anna orange circular. Again, a nice combination cover. This, of course, both the state postage is 4.5 annas and the imperial postage is 4.5 annas. And 4.5 annas, obviously, because 4 annas is paying the registration rate fee and half anna for the postage. The next shade is another rare shade. It's carmine red. The half anna is a discovery copy. It's not listed in any catalog. The 1 anna is also a discovery copy. The only shade, the only denomination listed for carmine in catalogs today is the 4 annas. And here we have one of 2 known used examples of the 4 annas. So in 1874, the state moved away from watercolor for a bunch of reasons, but primarily because watercolors were not fast. And given the weather conditions, especially in Jammu, would be a lot of monsoon rains, it was decided to move on to oil colors, which were obviously fast and wouldn't bleed. So the first color we'll talk about is what is deep black watercolor. Sorry, we're still. I apologize for talking about oil colors because we're still in watercolor. So in 1874, the state experimented with a bunch of new colors. Because if you remember earlier, it was basically 3 colors, very simple: black, blue, and red. But there was a lot of demand from overseas collectors. And at some point, it was decided to print these stamps in some fancy colors. Now, the reason these stamps are all listed in catalogs and they're all considered postage stamps issued by the state because they're all known postally used on covers. The first color being black. It's deep black. It's very deep, intense black, unlike the 1866 color, which was really more of a gray black. And this is, of course, known in all 3 denominations. The half anna deep black happens to be one of the most common circular stamps. Here we have an example of a double impression of the half anna stamp on the left. The left copy is printed double. And here we have the largest known multiple of the half anna deep black. This is not the only such multiple block of 12. There's another one in Mr. Jaretsky's collection. Here we have an interesting Tedbech block where the left 4 stamps in comparison to the right are facing upside down. There's another 2 pairs known. So a total of 4 Tedbech pairs have been recorded of this deep black stamp. Moving on to the next color, bright blue. It's very different than the blue shades that we talked about earlier from the 1866 printing. This is really an intense, bright blue. Doesn't match up to any of the other known shades. This is the only known cover bearing a half and a bright blue. And this happens to be the largest known multiple of the 1 Anna bright blue. And here we have a Ted Batch pair of the 1 Anna bright blue. And moving on to the next color, this is a shade that is not listed in catalogs, but I'm a firm believer that this is not an 1866 printing, it's the later printing. Again, I think it's a result of reprinting the bright blue stamp again. And of course, it's known in all three denominations. Next is what is called the deep blue black, catalogs listed as deep blue black. And this happens to be one of only 4 known used examples. It's only known in the 4 Anna denomination, by the way. Now we come to some really pretty fancy colors, emerald green. Again, these were printed in all 3 denominations. And here we have a 4 Anna emerald green used on an Indian Queen Victoria half Anna postal stationery envelope. This cover completely baffles me because I don't understand why a 4 Anna stamp was used on a half Anna combination postal stationery envelope. It really should have been a half Anna stamp. I can speculate that perhaps the person who affixed the stamp may have thought this to be a half Anna stamp, not realizing this was a 4 Anna. So I believe this letter is grossly overpaid, but nevertheless, it's commercially used, genuine example of one of only 4 recorded covers bearing a 4 Anna emerald green. Besides the emerald green, there's also another shade of green. It's more of a yellow green, very distinct from the emerald. If you look at the emerald green, you can see it's a true emerald green, whereas you can see this is a lot more of a yellow green. This happens to be one of only 2 examples of this yellow green. And here we have the 1 Anna and the 4 Anna in yellow green. Yellow, one of the toughest stamps to identify the denomination because the nature of the ink. It's very difficult to read the denomination in the middle, but I think the 4 Annas is quite easy to decipher. And this happens to be the only known used example of a yellow circular stamp used on cover. All right, so I spoke about oil colors, and now we're on oil colors. And I explained why the state decided to move on to oil colors. So the first oil color used is red. Again, it was all 3 denominations were printed using the red oil color. Here we have the largest known multiple of the 4 Anna red in oil color. Now, this was issued for a very short period, July 1877 to, well, not that short, almost a year, to May 1878. Next shade, and this is known both for the Jammu circular stamps as well as the Jammu rectangular, is a shade of brown red. The next color we'll talk about is black, black oil color. This happens to be the earliest known usage of a black oil color circular stamp. And here we have the only known example of the half Anna black oil color printed double. Slate blue was the next color, and these were printed between August 1877 and April 1878. And here we have one on cover. Of course, this is going to Amritsar. You can see the delivery strike of Amritsar, and because there's no the imperial postage was not prepaid. It resulted in postage of 1 anna. Here we have a Ted Batch pair of the half anna slate blue. The left two stamps are pointing downwards in relationship to the right two stamps. This happens to be one of 4 known Ted Batch pairs. This is 2 of 4 known, obviously. Here we have the 1 anna in a block of 8. And this happens to be one of only 2 known used examples of the 1 anna. And this is the discovery copy of, well, this was discovered years ago, so I don't understand why it's not yet listed in any catalog. The next color, sage green. These were printed in all 3 denominations. And here we have a sage green on cover. This happens to be one of only 2 known examples of the half anna sage green in oil color. The next paper, so the state experimented, tried to move away from the native paper, which was uneven, and because of the uneven texture, the impressions weren't as crisp and clear. So the state started experimenting with, in 1877, with European late paper. Very few copies are known. Extremely rare, used for a very, very short period of time. It was basically an experiment that never really, because right after they started the experiment, the state moved away from circular stamps. So here we have the red. This is the only known example of the 1 anna in red on European late paper, and we have the largest known multiple on the right of the 4 annas on European late paper. So this is a really interesting cover. When I first acquired this collection, I was convinced that it was a forgery. But not just the other day, I said, I need to really look into this, because Hellriegel had described this as one of his greatest rarities in his collection. And I know Hellriegel was an extremely knowledgeable philatelist, especially when it came to Jammu Kashmir. He had written many articles. He had a gold medal winning exhibit in Washington 2006. So I said, I need to really look into this cover. So I decided to lift the top two stamps off the cover to examine them, because it is a well-known fact that no reprints are known on European late paper. So I said, if Hellriegel claimed that this is the rare half anna red on European late paper, and sure enough, I lifted it, I took it off the cover, and it is indeed on European late paper. So it just goes to show that things can be deceiving at first sight. At first glance, I was like, no, this can't be. But it turns out to be one of the greatest rarities of Jammu Kashmir. It's a very, very it doesn't look all that attractive, but the only 3 covers are known, this being the 4th one, only 3 covers are known bearing the half anna red on European late paper. And here we have the 4 anna in oil color on European late paper. This is one of 5 recorded used examples. Black on European late paper. And here we have a Ted Batch pair. And then slate gray oil color on European late paper. On the left happens to be the largest known multiple. And then the catalogs list, so I call this more of a slate gray, even though the catalog only lists one shade. They list as slate blue. If you notice, there's quite a bit of difference between the shades, between the stamps here and then this. So this to me is more of a slate blue. And this happens to be the 2nd largest known multiple. And this 4 anna sage green in oil color on European late paper. And then we have yellow. This is the largest known multiple of the yellow, half-anna yellow on European late paper. And this is the only known used example of the half-anna yellow on European late paper. Now, there's another shade which is different than the yellow. It's I call it the olive yellow. And it's also only known in half-anna denomination. The last thing they experimented with, the state did before they stopped producing circular stamps, is they used thick yellowish wove paper, which sometimes is also referred to as sugar wove paper. This happens to be one of 5 known examples. And here's one on cover. So proofs and essays, no proofs and essays are known of the circular stamps. Reprints. There was an obvious demand for these circular stamps, especially in the European market. So some corrupt government officials decided to fulfill these orders from European collectors and dealers by stealing stamps from the state treasury. And they did that for quite some time. But at some point, they panicked because the stock of the state treasury was being depleted and there was strict accounting, supposedly. So they decided to reprint stamps they obviously had the dies, the 3 dies in their possession, so they used the original dies. But luckily for us, philatelists, the ink colors, as you remember, they were produced at that time. They were mixed when the stamps were printed. They could never replicate the ink colors, and that is why we are lucky today that these reprints were not produced in exact color matches to the original issued stamps. The only exception to this is, and Dr. Saul always warned me, he says, you have to be very careful of the sage green because that's the one shade that they were able to produce, almost mimic with the reprint. So one has to be really careful. There are other characteristics on how to differentiate between the sage green originals and reprints. So eventually, when the state postal department closed, all these reprints were sitting in the state treasury. The state decided to accept tender to sell the stock. So these stamps were sold and purchased by Reverend Simmons as genuine stamps. These were all sold in 1895 and purchased as genuine stamps, but only later on they were proved to have been forgeries, reprints made from the original die. So at some point, the same crooked officials did not have access to the original 3 dies, but the demand for these stamps were ongoing, and so they decided to replicate the 3 dies. They created 3 dies, what are today labeled as missing die. For the longest time, these stamps were considered to be genuine because the collectors just believed that there were 2 sets of dies that were being used. But when it came time to deface the dies, the state decided to deface all existing Jammu Kashmir dies so that to stop anyone from being able to reprint the state stamps, these 3 missing dies were never found. And that's when the state came to the realization that these were, in fact, forged dies. These were never used to print genuine stamps. And that's why they're called missing dies, because they were missing when the inventory was taken of the dies. The differences are subtle, but they're not that difficult to tell apart. They're quite easy to tell apart. Here is a sheet of stamps that was purchased from the state in 1894 as genuine stamps. The person, Reverend Sir George McMahon, had purchased these stamps from the state post office as genuine stamps. These are clearly missing die forgeries. Another classic forgery, and these were considered some of the greatest rarities of Asia, is called the Die 1 forgery, or the Die A. At some point, it was proven that these were in fact forgeries, and there we are. So these dies were defaced, as I mentioned. These dies were defaced in 1898. 10 impressions were taken from each defaced die, and here's an impression of that was taken from the half anna, 1 anna, and 4 anna die after it was defaced. This set of defaced impressions are ex Haverback and Fritz Stahl. And that's the story of Jammu Kashmir circular stamps. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'll take any questions or comments. Yes. I'm sorry to have gone over 45 minutes.
Well, thank you, Sandeep. Right now, there are no questions in the chat.
So I start
I
off.
ask a question? This is Dan Walker.
Yes, Dan.
Okay, I have three questions or comments. I am very impressed with so many non-cut to shape stamps. I mean, virtually everything was non-cut to shape. That's a phenomenal way of showing Jammu and Kashmir. The first question, though, is that when you lifted the two half anna reds on European laid paper from that high wriggle cover, the two bottom items, what do you think the two bottom items were?
So it's the bottom two stamps are a very controversial stamp. I have been talking to somebody about that particular stamp, and I'll tell you, and I didn't want to have this conversation today because I'm still doing more research. I believe that there are stamps that are yet to be listed.
Okay.
It says and I'll leave it at that because I am quite convinced that there was another seal from Jammu that was used to impress stamps when there was a shortage of half anna stamps.
Okay. Finally, the third item is that when you announced that the catalogs finally fixed the 1 anna versus 4 anna thing, you used 18 rather than 19. What year was did the Gibbons catalog change correct the 4 annas from 1 anna?
I believe it was 1970, not 1870, of course.
1970. Okay, thank you.
Another typo. Thank you.
It was.
That was a wonderful, wonderful talk, Sandeep. Really.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm surprised you got it through so fast, but I learned a great deal.
Well, coming from you, that means a lot because obviously, Dan, for those of you that don't know, Dan is just as passionate a collector of Jammu Kashmir as I am. So,
and of course, he used to collect Sarawak and Borneo as well.
Right. And Romania.
It didn't make it easy for yourself, Dan. I can just it's fantastic, Sandeep. I mean, I can remember, before COVID, going to the Global Philatelic Summit, talking about the aesthetics of exhibiting. And our friend Henrik Moritzen put up saying that only the most pristine of covers would ever be in his collection. Absolute pristine. And of course, collecting Sarawak when there's only 1 or 2 covers known, you don't care how pristine they are. You just want a cover because there's only 1 or 2 known. And you've proved that that ugly can be beautiful.
Agreed. Absolutely.
They're known as the ugly stamps, are they not?
Well, Simon, that goes to this point I wanted to make. So beauty is really in the eyes of the beholder.
Yeah.
You know, Indian feudatory state stamps are the coin term in Australia and the chat groups is the uglies. They're called the uglies.
But they're beautiful.
I find them. You know, I collected King George VI. I had the red album. And that's what I collected till 1983. I was a very passionate collector of King George VI. So I collected stamps that were printed entirely, totally different process. Beautiful stamps, recess printed, and then all of a sudden Liz shows me, for the very first time I actually looked at Indian States was in 1985, and she showed me her collection, and I was in awe. I said, my God, these are so beautiful. They're so different. They're so raw. They're so, and that's what actually attracted me to Indian States, was the crudeness of the printing.
Oh yeah, and the amount of varieties you get. But I mean, the most valuable stamp in the world can never be considered beautiful.
Simon,
Yes.
Simon, we have one question that's come in, which I'll answer if I may. Rob Myers is asking, is it possible to get a file copy of the presentation? I guess, Rob, by that, you're either asking for a copy of the slides, or better yet, a copy of the presentation, because as we heard, Sandy, as he was going through, was giving us far more explanation that's on the slides, and indeed he was correcting some of the, as he said, the odd mistake here and there. So,
well, it was the slides actually, because the colours were very impressive, and I collect Jammu, as Sandeep knows, so it would be very useful.
okay, well, I'm sure between you and
I'll email you the slide in PDF format.
yeah,
Okay, thank you very much.
that's excellent. But what I was going to say, Rob, was that the reason we're videoing this is because then this recording, once I've done a bit of editing to it, will be available on the Royals YouTube channel, because it will be in the public domain, and therefore if you wanted to view it again at any point, you could do.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sandy, could I comment? Sandy, as you know, I've got a slight affinity for J&K, even though I sold my collection 24 years ago, and I was the one that actually got Gibbons to change the values in the part one. But
Oh wow! Okay.
right, I think it was like 78, something like that. But Philip Kins will know, and there's somewhere in the beginning of some 70s edition that says when it happened. Lovely stuff. Too many stamps for me, but I always appreciated the colours. In fact, I was hooked. I was hooked by opening up the part one Gibbons catalogue when I was about 12 years old, and the J&K, especially the Jammu rectangular sheet, was actually on the left-hand page when you opened it up flat in the center. And I looked at this image and I thought, no, there is no way anything like this could ever have been used on a letter. It's just completely ridiculous. And that sat in my brain until I was about 14, 15, went into Gibbons and bought and spent £7 on their only stock, which was the sheet of J&K stamps. But a fabulous to see, because also what you brought together is all these classic provenance items. And nice to see a couple of mine, or what were mine. So I know that I knew they were in a good home, as you know. So brilliant. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Talk about my mentor going back once again. Anthony just reminded me. So just to show how great a friend Fritz was, 20 years ago, I think it was more than 20 years ago, maybe 22 years ago, I asked Fritz if he would help me. I was considering buying a very rare, big collection of Jammu Kashmir from a dealer in London, in the UK. And he says, fine. He came with me. He spent 2 days at this person's house. It was the Kashmir Blue collection, which I agreed to buy. Unfortunately, things transpired. But Fritz, that's how good a friend he was. He came all the way from California to London to help me evaluate the collection. And then his advice to me was, Sandeep, if you let go of this, you will regret it for the rest of your philatelic life.
Was that before or after you and Fritz came to me?
It was the day we went to see him the day after we came and saw you.
Okay, so at least you got one out too.
Anyway, Tony, great question. Thank you. Simon.
Yeah, I have one more question, Sandy.
Yeah, I think
General McMahon.
you.
Sandeep,
Yes,
you mentioned General McMahon and the forgeries.
right.
Are the forgeries still valuable, or are they now longer?
The die 1 or the die A forgery is still considered great rarity. Back then, it was. I mean, I'd have to find an old catalog. I have a 1900 Scott catalog, but I need to find one that's a couple years prior to that. I should show that to show the relative valuation of a die 1 versus another great rarity of a known rarity today. And the die 1 were considered much rarer than any of the genuinely issued stamps.
Wow.
Sandeep,
yes.
Sandeep, the American Philatelic Research Library has a good collection of old Stanley Gibbons catalogs. So if you ever get up there, go look at the collection, at the catalogs to see if they have something older that you need.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm gonna do that. Go to the APRL.
Good. Well, Simon, I think that may have been the final question. So, what closing remarks would you like to make? What have you got to say to us all?
I mean, those of you that have been here this afternoon have seen the most amazing world-class collection that you'll never see the likes of again. Okay. I hate talking value when it comes to stamps, even though, I've had this article and value was mentioned. But those of you that don't know, these stamps are very difficult to find and are valued accordingly. And as Sandeep said, they were considered great classics of world philately, but they're ugly. And I love them because they're ugly. Fantastic presentation, Sandeep. And you're coming back to do another one next year. We agreed earlier, and I really look forward to it. And I advise you all to come back and see his next presentation next season. And thank you very much for giving it. And I'm sure everyone present will agree that we were entertained royally there. Thank you.
We were indeed.
For the opportunity.
Simon,
Yes.
I have something to put on screen because the other Simon has got a certificate for Sandeep. So I will put that on the screen so we can all see it. And I know that our president is with us today. There we are, Sandeep.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot.
That will be in the mail to you, of course. Yeah.
Does Simon want to say a few words or not?
Mr. Richards? Nope, he's not saying very much. Okay. Anyway.
He's probably taking notes because he's probably going to be judging this. Your display in Dubai, Sandeep. So.
Well, I hope Simon watched the presentation then.
He did, yeah.
He did, but I can see that that since then he has left the meeting. I can see that now in the list of attendees. But yes, he was here. He was watching your presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.